My very first exposure to Dragon Ball proper was the game Dragonball Xenoverse. Quite a funny way to be introduced to a series, and honestly, I barely remember what I even thought of it really. I of course knew what Dragon Ball was, but had never touched a chapter or watched an episode. But after reading all the way through the manga and watching some of the supplementary material, I decided to revisit this game out of some idea of nostalgia. To be honest, nostalgia is going to barely factor into this review. I didn't really find much in the end. I remember playing all the way through it, but I didn't really get any warm, fuzzy feelings coming back to it. I find games based on anime a pretty fascinating subgenre, so I pulled it apart with great interest, but that was purely with my current perspective. So I want to discuss what makes this game unique and how it plays overall, finding what works and what doesn't. So, a review. With that said, what makes Dragon Ball Xenoverse itself? In a world with a near never-ending stream of Dragon Ball games, they certainly start to blur together. After about 60 games leading up to Xenoverse's release, you need to do something to set it apart in order for it to really have any appeal beyond, it's more Dragon Ball. Xenoverse made a couple of different, strong creative choices to set it apart from many other entries, namely the create a character aspect and the various what-if scenarios, neither of which are still completely unique to this game though, mind you. Dragon Ball Online and Ultimate Tenkaichi have some form of OC creation, and what-if scenarios have been explored throughout the Budokai Tenkaichi games in the first place. But the merging of these two into a more fleshed out scenario is something that only really happens here. In Xenoverse, you play as a time patroller, working hard to ensure the sanctity of the timeline. This also helps justify the MMO or Monster Hunter-like structure, where many other players are doing the same thing at the same time as you. So we're going to start by breaking down how well the game commits to either of these core pillars. Firstly, with the character customization. I would say the create a character menu is pretty decent, all things considered. Luckily, you have a couple options open to you, rather than the default humans or Saiyans one would expect. The alien races look great, and it's cool that you're able to play as a Margin. Funnily enough, there's been one in the series. Though the disparity between the male and female options are a little bit funny. The women have to be as skinny as possible. It's jarring. I think some more choices to scale things a little bit would be pretty good, rather than just swapping between presets, but that's a minor nitpick. There have definitely been better character customization systems and character creation systems, but for this game, I think it's fine. It's not gonna blow you away, you're not gonna be able to create anything in the world, but it's able to remain in the sort of idealized canon of the series. So, once you have the looks, then there are the RPG mechanics to determine your playstyle. I appreciate that each of the main stats are very clear as to what they contribute to. They're very plain. I think that works for something so action-focused like this. The main choice you have when slowly developing your character is whether you focus on physical attacks or key attacks. It's smart to differentiate the two, and what you end up putting stats into can help influence decisions later down the line about what sort of abilities you want to equip. Beyond that, there are the different outfits, which offer various visual and mechanical variability. The main tertiary loop throughout is slowly building up your repertoire of equipment, accessories, Z-souls, and especially techniques, all while you level up, thus making those techniques stronger, you get more health, you get more stamina, things like that. I think this is about the bare minimum that should be done with a proper creator character. You have a solid influence on how they play, what they can do, and what they look like. Being able to assemble your favorite techniques, styles, and outfits throughout the entire series is some solid fan service, while still being tied to the core game design. I don't think it's anything exceptional, but I also don't mean to put it down. It's fun and at points can be a little exciting. By setting a lot of techniques as randomly received rewards under specific missions, they can become even more sought after. The less you have, the more you want. The RNG might be frustrating, but it creates a personal attachment to specific skills. Getting the Super Vanishing Ball would be nice as a player who happens to like Kid Buu and the look of his Ki Blasts, but it's only after grinding for it and trying over and over to add it to your arsenal does it really feel satisfying. Then, after, every time you use it, you'll feel accomplished. You weren't handed this item, you earned it. You get to be more like Kid Buu because you worked hard. It's almost a simulacrum of actual training, the real blood, sweat, and tears necessary to achieve something. It sounds silly, to put it so seriously, but it is solid game design and it's pretty effective. It's the core tenet of something like Monster Hunter's loot design, and it works here, but where it fails is that some of the drops are just too frustrating, and when the gameplay is repeated to such a ludicrous extent, the cracks start to show, but I'll get into that later. I just wanted to illustrate why they would put random chance on acquiring skills. I think that closer connection to it actually enhances the customization aspect. Finally, I think the thing that has some of the most potential is what is oddly out of place in this game, which are the mentors and the character quests. Let's begin with the quests. As I will discuss further on, parallel quests are a big part of the game's overall loop. They are where you will most likely find all of the outfits, Z-Souls, skills, and the like, besides just the shop. They offer varying scenarios of all sorts. Usually they are started just by walking up to the right desk and asking for them, but occasionally characters from the series will be waiting around the hub area with a question mark above their head. They'll plead for the characters to help in whatever scenario is relevant. Teen Gohan might help for some training against Cell, Boo will ask to buy some time while he makes pudding for a hungry Beerus, etc. I think this is a very cute touch. It's solid flavor text in order to justify these loosely themed missions. But I actually think this is way more important than the game treats it, and is pretty underdeveloped due to it. When you have a creator character, they look like how you want them to look, they act like how you want them to act, all of these things. But they just feel like an action figure, and they feel like an action figure you're jamming against other action figures. I'll get into that a little bit more later as well. When you see your character fighting alongside Goku against Cell or something like that, it doesn't actually feel like very much. It's a part of the fan service that is quite core to games like this, but especially due to the OC creation. You don't just want to hang out with your favorite Dragon Ball characters, you want your character to hang out with your favorite Dragon Ball characters. So when it feels a little out of place and a little almost jarring, it becomes so much more tragic. For example, it's already humorous enough when Goku says, "Thanks, stranger. Oh, wait, where did you go?" every time you help in the main quest, but this is much more extreme. I don't feel like I'm talking to Teen Gohan who wants me to help train him for Cell when it's so anachronistic. I know it might be taking it too seriously, but it just feels like lazy design. Instead of feeling like an interaction with the character, it feels like someone's OC that they've dressed up as their favorite character. A cheap, randomly generated character in order to perform the duty of a menu option. It's weak. They don't know where they are or who they're talking to. They just somehow appeared in this weird time patrol station and were like, "Hey buddy, why don't you come help out?" It doesn't feel very in character to just not react to any of it. What carries this same problem, but to perhaps a more aggravating degree, are the mentors. Not only can characters come appeal for your aid, they can also come to the hub world outside of time to train you. In theory, this is genuinely great. Training under someone you are a fan of both serves to be solid fan service all on its own, but also acts as a fast track to learning their specific skills. It's twofold motivation, it's a good idea. The same thing is done in Street Fighter VI's single player mode, for example, and it works super well there. That's a total completion of this concept. But in Xenoverse, the confusion about at what point in the timeline this character is, what they do or don't know, whether they even know where they are, becomes worse and worse as you spend time with them. They'll tell you to practice skills, and between training sessions, you have to level up the invisible friendship meter by using said skills and inviting your teacher on parallel quests. But it just feels like a weird clone, or like a hologram, or a recreation of this iconic character, generated without any knowledge of the world around them. Now, this criticism could be easily misunderstood. I don't mean that there should be deep and fascinating character arcs with each and every teacher, as much as I would like that, but I understand it's not realistic whatsoever. But even just a bit of flavor text would help justify it at all. For example, Imagine if you talked to Piccolo, and he said, "I was invited to this place in order to train you time patrollers. You think you have what it takes to carry on my techniques in these battles I fought?" Something like that would alleviate all of this and make the game feel so much more grounded and exciting. And that could be done with just a couple lines of dialogue. The lack of it just feels lazy and like a little cheap. If the game committed to fulfilling the concept of being a new character in the Dragon Ball world, it could be something more special. Instead, the overarching theme of time-traveling space peacekeepers feels like a thin justification for them to ignore all of the writing and keep things simple. So whenever you meet your favorite character, that villain you can't get enough of, or even someone you hate, you just feel like a cardboard cutout. Like taking a photo with a wax statue and claiming it's the real celebrity. In fiction, there is practically no reason to do it like this. It's a dumb spin-off with alternate timelines. Why can't the player become just actually friends with Goku? It's a waste. Now I think it's time to talk about that other pillar. We've been talking about being a character in this world and interactions and OC creation and all of that kind of stuff. But there's also the what-ifs and the alternate scenarios. If the player's interactions aren't going to feel grounded or real or engaging, then may as well explore the nonsensical possibilities that would never take place in canon. I think more than any other series, Dragon Ball has run its main Z sagas into the ground. Saiyans, Namek, Cell, Buu. Over and over again. Forever. It certainly gets old. At the time of this game's release, Super had just started, and due to GT's unfortunate reputation, most of its storyline has been relegated to side content only, or just straight up DLC in cases like this. So proper what-ifs are new ways to engage with these characters that are sorely needed. Personally, I would love to see some more unique stories dreamed up for a game like this. After its release, despite Fighter Z's subpar story, the unique character of Android 21 is still quite beloved. Things like that can add a lot of flavor. Here in Xenoverse, the new characters are mostly relegated to quite uninteresting villains. The Supreme Kai of Time is actually all the way from Dragon Ball Online, which is a really cute little touch, but she doesn't offer too much as far as proper characterization goes. So if we want any sort of story, or unique narrative, it will be in the small interactions between the player and insert and the characters, which we've gone over and aren't amazing, and then the what-ifs. So as far as the main story goes, these scenarios can be entertaining or deliberately cheap. For example, overall, the main story's justification for why anything is happening at all is that some villains are coming in and changing time by either making characters stronger or affecting little scenarios in different ways, which can lead to the what-ifs. For example, in the Cell Saga, Mr. Satan ends up getting quite the dramatic power-up, so it's up to you to defeat him and restore things to how they should be. While of course it's notably shallow, I think as far as fan service goes, it's a comical idea. Mr. Satan is a joke-weak character. Having to fight him like tooth and nail is actually kind of humorous. I would have loved a dash more dialogue to flesh it out, make it actually feel like something that's happening, and again, not just a random NPC with the skin of Mr. Satan, but regardless. But for the other example, in the Namek Saga, one aberration in time is that Frieza skips his second and third form and goes straight to his final one. This isn't a cute twist of established canon, but just an excuse to save on models and characters. I don't think it's interesting fan service to have the exact same fight but cut out two forms. Hypothetically, you could make an entertaining story out of this, see how it plays out, changes the dynamics. Perhaps it forces them to rethink a strategy, even before going Super Saiyan. Namek isn't set to be destroyed and everyone has to team up in a novel way to aid Goku further. But the aim of the game is to fix these errors, so the result of them are never seen or even speculated on. Instead, Frieza is in his final form and you have to fight him with Goku a few times. It doesn't spark any fan service, and instead just the same song and dance that we're used to. Overall, it's hard to say how it levels out, but I think it's fair to be reasonable and say that the amount of variation in the main story is subpar. There's potential, but it's hard to say that it ever comes close to achieving a fraction of it. The few cute or charming moments aren't very engaging when the concept grows thin, and all you do is just resume the same single gameplay without any dialogue or interesting situations. I think this same concept actually works slightly better in the parallel quests. These are smaller side quests designed to be farmed out with randomized reward. They pad out the general gameplay structure in a smart way, even if the content is a tad repetitive. But in these quests, by doing well or performing certain objectives, it can trigger an additional event. Unfortunately, these are randomized, even when all the prerequisites are cleared, which is incredibly frustrating, and I hate that, but I like the idea of it without that quite a lot. Since this is side content, the expectations for what can be done is a little lower. There are like over 100 of them after all, not even including the DLC. So you don't need to have lots of dialogue or any cutscenes or anything like that, because it's side content. You shouldn't expect something to that degree. And they have an interesting possibility of interactivity. The story missions always go the same way every time, but these might extend further, even if it's not necessarily a what-if scenario, but just an additional opponent. For example, in Parallel Quest 14, you join Frieza, fighting the main cast of Z Fighters with the goal of defeating Goku and Krillin. But if you defeat Krillin first, then there's a chance that Goku will transform into a Super Saiyan and you'll have to defeat him as well, all while Frieza is still in his first form instead of his final. Again, it's not exactly a what-if scenario, but I think that element of interactivity is quite novel. The possibility of a further change is exciting, farmable, and a solid execution of its ideas. While you may be fighting just another Goku and Krillin over and over again, you do it in a specific way that recreates a scenario, now suddenly the game responds. That's exciting. Another example at a similar point in the game is Parallel Quest 16. It's a simple quest fighting Frieza's henchmen and then the big man himself. Vegeta will join you and Goku in the fight. The additional requirements are a bit more complicated here, so I won't really get into that. But if you fulfill them, Vegeta can transform into a Super Saiyan, and after beating the enemies, you have to fight him. If it were perfect, then we would get to enjoy some actual dialogue that explores how interesting it would be if Vegeta transformed on Namek. Instead, it is the narrative equivalent of, like I said, smashing action figures together. But as far as side content goes, that's a lot more justifiable, and in a game about fan service and action figures, this is a solid execution of the game's core conceit. Unfortunately, only a few of the parallel quests work this way. In fact, a number of them just have you fighting a randomized custom character as their ultimate finish, which is super boring. But I think it shows the genuine potential in the game concept and the possible strength of this structure. But now that we have talked about all the ways the game's identity and structure tries and kind of fails to execute on its ideas, let's bring it back to the basics. How is the gameplay? So now we're going to review the minute-to-minute combat and action a little bit more in depth. After all, it is the meat at the core of this experience. So let's get this out of the way. The gameplay of Xenoverse isn't very good. I like a lot of the ideas, but just like the game's structure, it rarely is as fun as it could be. To start, I appreciate the implementation of 3D environments and fast-paced movement. Launching an enemy far away and then zooming over to them really communicates the frantic fights from the series proper. It feels surprisingly intuitive to jump into the air and fly about, locking onto enemies in order to simplify the controls, so it never gets too overwhelming or anything. But once you start fighting some enemies, you feel just how simple all of it really is. You have light attacks and heavy attacks for basic combos, though they really don't feel too different from one another like at all. The only distinction between combos is just how fast it launches an enemy away, or if it does at all. That's kind of it. You have a ki bar and a stamina bar. The stamina can be used for these iconic, like, aura-covered dashes through the air, and the slightly finicky instant transmission. Sometimes you're able to teleport to where an enemy has just been sent, and continue slapping them around. It's a little inconsistent depending on the samey combos and characters, but in the end, doesn't matter too much anyway, as DPS remains quite similar across the board. You aren't really incentivized to experiment, and there isn't even anything to experiment with if you do want to try. But beyond just the movement and basic attacks, you also have the skills. Using your key bar, you're able to set 4 skills on the main page. Then a second page holds 3 super skills and a unique utility skill. I think this is a good system overall. It allows for a lot of variety, playable characters can be assembled quite easily while still feeling authentic, so it grants wider character roster, and it plays well into the customization present in the game. Basically every technique, every little attack animation, anything a character shouts out is something that you can do in this game. The offensive ones are split into physical and key-based, mostly close-range strikes and mid to long-range laser beams and blasts, but there are some exceptions. And when it comes to mixing them into combos, the system like half works. At its best, physical skills can be used to extend combos without launching, or deliberately launching enemies far away whenever you like. Then key blasts and abilities can be used to strike launched enemies at a distance when you can't chase after them, or before you're close enough to engage them with basic attacks. The feeling of keeping an enemy stun-locked for as long as possible, before finally launching them, then blasting them from a distance with a Kamehameha, is genuinely quite electrifying. It feels good, it's dynamic, and even like a tad skillful. You feel cool for doing it, and it's fun to pull off. But this is about the only thing the combat has going for it. Many of the skills aren't balanced very well. A majority of them are weaker than just continuously beating up an enemy with basic attacks. Range isn't very beneficial when you can zoom over to your enemy in like almost an instant. Some of them have terrible tracking and often miss without much of an advantage to offset this problem. So if you want to be as effective as possible, you'll just be button mashing. If you want to experiment and do as many fun moves from the show as you want, you'll be doing a tiny bit less button mashing while taking a lot longer to complete every quest. That is not ideal. Sometimes the 3D fighting gets very messy as well. Like I said, the tracking isn't great, and when moves clash, the camera can start swinging horribly around, and your character can't find a plane to stabilize against. Overall, it is simple. Not the worst problem to have, but it gets dramatically more infuriating upon repetition, and the whole game is built on repetition. The game offers nothing to do but battle. Even in the 1 in 10 quests, you have to do something like collecting the Dragon Balls. You just run around like normal and fight a tad less while recovering them. It doesn't feel like meaningfully unique gameplay. So as the health bars slowly balloon to be larger and larger, and you discover all of the weird moves aren't very effective, and the shallow combat feels all the more boring. To be honest, it really is the game's tragic flaw. I love a variety of the techniques, but I think while the visuals are a little dated, there's still a strong conversion of Dragon Ball into 3D, and the parallel quests have some strong potential, but when the sheer act of playing starts to dull the mind, all of it slowly fades away. Grinding out randomized ultimate finishes and the corresponding skills goes from a fun challenge to a dreadful slog. The mission structure is very similar to Monster Hunter, but in that game, fans relish the opportunity to grind for rare drops. In Xenoverse, it is universally bemoaned. It's easy to see why. So overall, I don't really think Xenoverse is a good game. It's a quite shallow experience, spread far too thin. But I can see a spark of something real and fascinating here. Elements that could potentially add up to be something sort of special in a different situation. Of course, it'd be hard to finish this video without acknowledging the existence of the sequel. One that expands on this game quite a bit and has continued to receive DLC and support, literally to this day. Well, I intend on coming around to that game and giving a review on its own, but at the time of recording, I simply have not played enough of it to get a sense for whether it iterates on anything I mentioned here or even brings anything new to the table, but it'll be fun to discover someday and present it to you all. So, there we have it. I really hope you enjoyed my review of this game. What do you think about Xenoverse? I'm curious to hear what people think, if you agree or disagree, or perhaps have some experience with the online that I mostly skip past. So please let me know. And for now, thank you all for watching, and see you next time.